Welcome back to Side Quests VIII uh, for Final Fantasy VIII, episode 20. Back with me here is my perennial companion and constant party member, uh, perennial party member and constant companion, perhaps for the
Mm.
alliteration, Wes Chance. Wes, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. How's it going?
It's going well, and more and more I'm feeling the gravitational pull towards the teleological or the telos of our endeavor here.
Yeah,
And or perhaps that's an interesting question, what the telos or end is of the video game experience. Huizinga would suggest that playing is an end in itself.
indeed.
And so coming towards the end of the game is, I suppose, in some ways a culmination of the experience of playing, but completing the game in order to be done does not seem to be what
No.
the end or of the game is. And in fact, with this game, there is no end to it in that particular way because we've played it again.
That's right. And it's better every time, like a fine wine. You get better with age with this game. That's what I've been
And
finding anyway.
yes, and that's something I'm constantly interested in hearing from you. Your sort of reader slash player or ludotic slash narratologic experience, but you seem to have been into the game since really very early on in the
Hmm.
play through playing cards successfully, doing things with GFs. I think you kind of got it, as it were, when it comes to what the game is. But something I feel compelled to mention before I go into my summary and then we dive into our analysis, is that a day ago, the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy IX came around,
Mm.
and a lot of fans were expecting, especially after a conspicuous absence of announcements about a month, I think, or so back at a major convention.
Mm.
A lot of fans were expecting, after a movie appeared on YouTube suggesting some sort of commemoration, that there could be a remake or maybe a remaster at the least. And then the day came and went, even with
Oh.
Japanese fans making fun of the American fans, saying it's actually the next day over here. It's not coming. It's but all that goes to say is that a day later, I think we have a good announcement,
Oh.
which is that even though I don't think it's totally determined, the compass seems to be pointing towards going towards Final Fantasy IX after completing Final Fantasy VIII.
Mm. Hmm.
I think the sands can change quickly, as it were, but possibly our few fans who are disconsolate about a lack of Final Fantasy IX news find some consolation in this potential future.
I- I'm all for it. That's one I think I might have only played through once. So I got, farther back in the day than I did with eight, but not by a lot, right? If the point of the game is to recur and go back and try it again and do it over, I don't know that I've ever truly played Final Fantasy IX. So
Mm,
this will be good.
mm. Yes, if all reading is rereading, if all playing video
Yeah.
games is replaying video games, then and really putting the final and the Final Fantasy to the test, even as its own iteration, right?
Yeah.
If you replay it, what is the finality? You know, and to some extent, I think final is like ultimate, in that it's trying to attain a standard like that of the
Hmm.
classic. Um,
It's yeah, and also just to jump in here, like
yeah.
with the idea of repetition and finality, I think you see that really clear with the sorceress in this game, right? So like this problem of how can there be more than one sorceress at a time? We're starting to get a little bit of an inkling of, well, in a way, there really is just the one, right? Ultimecia, and she keeps kind of like involving
Mm,
herself in the
mm,
past, and so she manifests and takes on these kind. I think Adea calls herself her shell almost, right? Like this suit of clothes that she puts on and then discards. And in this part of the game, we're finally uncovering a little bit of what's up with Adele. Uh, I think we both made it to the space station where she is in a kind of stasis. And myself, I got stuck playing cards because it's very, very difficult to play cards on the space station. Turns out I'm not actually that good at cards. Uh, I did get the Alexander card after many tries, and now I'm working on the Laguna card, and that one is proving elusive. But so there's this idea, yeah, that there's a a repetition, there's a cycling, um, and yet there's only sort of just one when you get right down to it, able to sort of make these different permutations, these kind of protean forms that she takes on. And I can't help but see that as some kind of commentary on this, on the whole series, right? That there's this idea, they're iterating on this idea of the quest, the heroes of light, the the sort of elemental slash other magic system that might be at work there, right? And sometimes there's a job system, sometimes not. But anyway, we're doing some of the same things, and we're trying all these variations and trying all of these uh, uh, you know attempts to push the boundary of what's possible with the current technology, whatever that might be, right? And just ever expand that circle, right, of play, and bring more things into it. I see that as taking some very interesting directions, right? In Final Fantasy VIII in particular, it's really strong in some areas and uh, quite lacking in others, arguably. Some of the more important ones are lacking, but uh, some would say this is one of the worst Final Fantasies. But I I still think that you can recognize that it is a Final Fantasy and that it's working within more or less that same field of play. Uh, and yeah, this is an enjoyable section of the game. There isn't a lot that we're really doing at this point, just kind of running from place to place. That was my impression.
Yes, we get a lot of explaining, and I'd like to make the point that I see a lot of both Chrono Trigger, the home of Shala in particular,
Mhm.
as reminiscent. I'm forgetting the name of that at the moment.
Zeal, the Kingdom of
Zeal, of
Zeal.
course, the Kingdom of Zeal,
Mhm.
and of course Esthar with its sort of like pale beauty and their cartoonish outfits. And
Mhm.
one thing I did want to mention is I think Ultimation might be a future resident of Esthar because of the scientific assistant to Odine. He has those horns. That's
Ah,
an outfit in Esthar, to have horns to the side of one's head. Now, I know obviously when we see Ultimation and see her horns, we'll think more demon, but Esthar seems to, in their out of touch sort of way, have developed a very interesting, very fashion in this very empty place, empty of tourists, but also just it's magnificent in scope,
mhm.
but not that many people there. But something I did want to touch on today, and which I didn't even want to put into voice during the pre-show, was talking a little bit about the representation of science and scientists in Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 8. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is sort of a Jungian sort of allegorical tangent, or elusive tangent, non-rational tangent, but talking about clownish costumes made me think of Kefka, and
Mhm.
then of course of Dr. Odine. So Kefka, the primary antagonist of Final Fantasy VI, is himself, of course, a product of a scientific experiment using Esper magic in order to infuse two individuals with super might. Celeste, who ends up being your actual main character in the second
Yeah.
part of the game for some time, and after attempting, I think suicide, like you mentioned
Mhm. Mhm.
last time, in the wake of so much loss, and also gets to be an opera singer, but and also Kefka, who then becomes a god, and sort of a mixture of Celeste and Kefka is what Sephiroth is in Final
Mm.
Fantasy VII. Also, sort of a scientific experiment, but add in aliens and 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 he's like this beautiful but extremely powerful and maybe crazy thing that wants to bring about some sort of alien apocalypse and become a god.
Mhm.
And that's pretty, there are a lot of similarities between that and the goals of Kefka, and how Kefka came to be himself and how his consciousness came to be fractured. Then enter Final Fantasy VIII, and all of a sudden in this part of the playthrough, we start to see some connections. Not only, like I said, beginning this point, to Chrono Trigger with the makeup of Esthar, but now when we see the prison of Adel and its
Mhm.
wings, it looks just like something out of Xenogears.
Mm.
And now we have entered into space opera territory, because now we are in space. And so there's Xenogears, but also Final Fantasy VII, because remember, there's magic, but also space aliens in Final Fantasy VII. And but so to that point, now we have magic and at least space, magic in space, in fact. And we see Adele vacuum sealed, of sort of horrific dimensions. And so this is something that gets mentioned, is that Adele's phenotype, body, physiognomy is strange. That Adele seems to have a female name, but very much manifests as like a giant bodybuilder. But when I say giant, I mean truly giant. It looks like uh, Adele is like 12 to 14 feet tall,
Mhm.
and like a strong male upper body physique. And so we've talked a little bit about the effects of the magic on the user, and we see Adea with her image in the party, with having like a corruption, a necrosis sort of creeping in from her hair towards her cheek. And
Yeah.
so I wonder about Adele and what is happening to her, or I guess probably a proto them in this case.
Yeah.
And perhaps that also says something about maybe the reproducibility, but also the sterility of being a magic wielder. Perhaps one reproduces the magic, but perhaps one does not, say, biologically reproduce. I don't know if there's uh, if one sort of is quote unquote denatured in that way by the magic, or renatured, I guess I should say. Um,
Mhm.
I think your point about there being one witch at all times is also very salient, and that it is confusing that there's Elena, but also Renoa, but also Idea, but also vacuum sealed Adele. And so I guess Adele is out of commission, and Elone is just a candidate, and Renoa, something is happening to, and Idea has been possessed and has also received powers before, and Adele is the next target. And how is that going to happen? Is
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the the movement that's happening here is very elegant in a way, right? Because it's like we have, as we saw last time, arrived at this point where the two timelines are sort of overlapping, right? Like
Mm,
Laguna is in Esthar rescuing Elone, and now Squall is in Esthar rescuing Elone, but really rescuing Renoa, right? Like let's
yes.
sort of call spade a spade there. And there's subtle differences about like the locations in these two timelines. We don't see how Laguna arrives, but we know that by Squall's time, the whole place is completely cloaked and invisible to outsiders, and has been, I
Mm,
guess, since the end of the war. Um, Now, somehow, Idea knows or theorizes that she can get help for her possession problem by going to Dr. Odine, right? And way back we heard about Odine's like bangle that Renault was going to try to put on Idea, right? Like so there is some knowledge of this guy, and he was already a high level scientist type dude even back in Laguna's time. So like he's been at the pinnacle of his career for a long time, doing
mm,
whatever it is he does with his research. And in Laguna's timeline, above the laboratory entrance, you can see the Lunatic Pandora, this huge monolith that sort of floats around. You can see it in the background. And I guess that's what Dr. Odine was working on at that time, potentially. But now in the current timeline, you can see the sky behind the lab entrance, and the Lunatic Pandora, sure enough, makes its appearance, but it comes from the west, right? So from over the ocean, just the same direction that Squall and everyone has come from. And now it's in the control of Galbadia, sort of. Ostensibly, like it's unclear. Anyway, like so you have one of your halves of your party is with Adea. So Zell sort of like volunteers to be in that party, and then you can place one other party member in with them, and their job is to basically get help for Adea, and Zell sort of takes it upon himself to like want to take down Lunatic Pandora, although it's really unclear why or how he's going to do that. He sort of just wants to. Um, Everyone's trying to tell him like we're not their target, like they're going to pass over the city, but they're not trying to do anything to us now. And so arguably that's really short-sighted of them. Like whatever it is they're doing is clearly nefarious, but they don't really fully explain what it is. And Zell, you know, hot-headed as ever, maybe he's right. Like maybe we should try to take out Lunatic Pandora before it does whatever it is it's trying to do. But anyway, that's, you know, one half. Meanwhile, yeah, Renoa and Squall, and you choose one other person, get blasted off into space to get medical treatment for Renoa, I guess because the technology in space is even better than the technology in Esthar or something. Uh, I guess like I kind of lost track of why that is happening at this point. Um, but anyway, we transfer Renoa from where she's sleeping in the presidential palace in Esthar over to the little capsules that get launched out of this like giant revolver, which is incredible, and just like what a way to get launched into space, right? So they um uh yeah, get this very beautiful, elegant like sequence of the capsules kind of like being cradled in this energy field as they arrive at the space station, and then the astronauts come out and like personally escort them into the station. You know, like it's very weirdly human, like how hands-on they are with the capsules. Like of all the things to not automate, that's the one. Like, they go out in spacesuits, and the president, whoever that is personally looking after Adele and checking that all the things on Adele's, you know, chamber are correct or whatever. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of this very like elegant getting all the pieces in place, right? Of Adea has to be there, and Squall and Renoa have to be up there because Adele's up there, and you know, it's awfully conspicuous how much they say, like how foolproof Adele's system is. Like, you know, nothing could possibly reach Adele in her containment chamber, right? So I'm sure it's totally fine. Um, but uh, but yeah, so there's this waltz music that plays too. This is like your point about the space opera, right? It's like it's very conscious evocation of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? And there's even like shots of everything sort of being like off kilter or even upside
Uh-huh.
down,
Uh-huh.
right? And the gravity is like reversed and you're walking but moving upside down. It's crazy. And man, they are good at cards up there. If I were truly a card player, I'd be able to do it without constantly going back and resetting the game because geez, yeah, they're gnarly. There's no battles in this section. I guess because I had my encounters turned off. Maybe there are in the Lunatic Pandora, but for me there was none. And so the only challenge is a doozy of trying to win card games with all the rules in action. Oh, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Well,
I found it very very dance like, right? That's how Squall and Renoa meet, and now there's this other kind of dance happening.
and they looked at the stars too when they
Indeed,
were first together. And
indeed.
happy Independence Day to you. We just had the 4th of July, so another fireworks display. I think we were actually
Mm.
so tired we didn't end up seeing it because we had to be up at 5 a.m. to run the Peachtree Road Race. But
Oh,
one thing I did want to say is that I do agree with the convoluted and very fast-paced nature of this moment, but I think that part of your confusion is because Squall has basically made found recourse in the occult. Not only has he become sort of overly emotional, right? He's like, if you do anything to her, if you hurt her over and over, he
Oh yeah, with
explodes,
that
all
gesture, the hand
caps.
gesture.
Yes, exactly. That questionable hand gesture these days. And Pedro Pascal would make him put it down. And and but he's overly emotive, and he gets called at one point, or called out in some ways. Yeah, yeah, you're her knight in shining
Knight in shining
armor.
armor. Yeah.
So he's starting to sort of play that role. But I wanted to say that and to that point, he is now looking for this occult sort of Morgan Le Fay solution.
Yeah.
It's got to be Alone. And he seems to hold the deluded view still, as we were talking about, that she can somehow help him change the past.
Mm.
So if there's any way to help Renoa, it's through her, but through a false hope in what her powers can
Ah, that's right.
achieve.
We're trying to get to
And
LNA to
and
help Renoa. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
in fact, I'm going to put out a hypothesis that this is partially to Ultimatia's will and her plan, and
Mm.
part of why she might be an answer to the question of what happened to Renoa, because she might get used as a tool to bring about what Ultimatia wants to happen
Yeah.
during the space opera sequence. She may be, in fact, the conductor
Mm.
of this opera, or the choreographer as well, because and Squall may be very much playing his part, like Cypher played his part for Ultimatia.
That makes
and
sense.
and it's interesting because I could see sort of uh well, like a I don't want to call this a feminist perspective, but like a critical a, the game could be showing sort of a criticism of the unsophisticated male consciousness that both Cypher and Squall, regardless of their ability to use these gun blades, they both become totally subject to the will of this, well, we'll see Ultimation, but extremely sexualized sorceress. And
Mm-hmm.
Idea is too. She is made to be beautiful, and with a very nice figure, with a very, like, an almost sheer dress on.
Yep.
And so both of these uh, young men are played like fiddles, as it were, and play these sort of and come to play in their own proper times, these stilted knightly roles,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
these unnuanced portrayals. Don't do anything to hurt her. It's like these are medical technicians on the most sophisticated, piece of research equipment in the universe, and that is maintained by Esthar. So these are the elite scientists of Esthar, which itself has an elite level of scientists so far above any other culture on the planet that
Yep.
it's absurd. Um, and so and so Squall's attitude there is out of place. And in the same way that Cypher's sort of belief that he was the good guy and that his former comrades were monsters
Mm-hmm.
is also sort of laughable. But I did want to say, based on what you said there, or just add, oh yes, one last connection about connections to Final Fantasy VII. We find out that there was a Sintra continent, and
Right.
so instead of having a northern crater, which is caused by an alien hitting the Earth, in Final Fantasy VIII, the southern continent has a crater,
Yeah.
where the Lunar Cry occurred. And we find out during this playthrough about the Lunatic Pandora, like you said. And if people wonder what lunatic means, it comes from Luna, the moon. And
Mm-hmm.
the moon, as Ariosto teaches us, is where one loses one's wits. So one is a lunatic when one is sort of touched by the moon, or the moon has stolen one's wits away. But the Lunar Cry, again using that same root, is when apparently the monsters, which the monsters on this unnamed planet that Final Fantasy VIII takes place on, which I guess we could call it Terra, but we can't because sometimes the world is called Terra.
Hmm.
I think in nine it might be called Terra, but there's kind of a weird duality of worlds in nine, if I seem to recall.
Hmm.
Um, but um, but the lunatic, or sorry, the Lunar Cry happens when a certain volume of monsters accrue, and then we get this weird scientific ish explanation. Then because of gravity and how gravity works, they create a lunar cry, which makes them descend through space down onto Earth. And apparently, there's no problem with them being in the atmosphere of the moon and then being in the Earth. They're just monsters. Um, I wish there were some sort of like original sin explanation for that, like related to the original god who does kick off the succession of the sorceresses, and that was also sort of part of it, or that there was some proto Lilith figure that created them. I don't know. Maybe I'll hypothesize that if it's not actually in the Ultimania. Give them
I
some, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any other explanation that's been given so far, but it's like taken for granted by all the Esthar populace, right? As few as they are, they do talk about like, hey, like, don't you know the moon is a dangerous place? Like, this is what we've been studying, um, and this idea of the lunar cry is kind of echoed in this location called Tier's Point on the
Mm-hmm.
continent of Estar, right? And you can go there and there's not really anything there. Um, it's a huge open space. I mean, it kind of echoes the city itself in a way, right? Because it's huge and empty, and it has like all these sort of cubes or something, these kind of uh, almost ziggurats, right? Little mini ones all around. And then in the center, it has this statue that really is reminiscent of the idea of like the goddesses from Final Fantasy VI, because they're these huge statues that seem sort of feminine, and they each have like a kind of a lute or some kind of like a harp in their lap, and they sit in kind of a circle facing outward. Um, so again, this idea, yeah, of statues, this monument to something, we're not exactly sure what. There is another place called the Sorceress Memorial, but anyway, uh, at this Tier's Point, right? So the idea of like a tier and the cry, I could see those things
Mm.
being related. Like Estar has maybe constructed this place in some way to respond to what's going on with the moon. Like anyway, they seem to be the only ones who know about this, and they seem to sort of assume that everyone knows about this, whatever it is. Um, and I also want to say, like within the mythos of the series, Final Fantasy IV also has you go to the moon late in the game to complete the quest that started on the planet. And so there is like within the RPG genre as well, like this whole series called Lunar, right? The Lunar games all involve some quasi, um, extraterrestrial experience. Um, and I think this is a thing in lots of games beyond the RPG genre too, because like uh, in comic books like the X-Men, you've got like a moon or a space station that's happening. In a game like Star Tropics, way back on the NES, late in the game you go off planet to a space station or the moon. I can't remember, but it's like a thing. It's a trope, right? That we could see in tons of video games, and specifically within Final Fantasy, this idea like the moon is this place of uh, like uncanny. It's like this kind of alternate uh, or like bizarro version of Earth, right? And they might like correspond in some way. Oh, and of course Majora's Mask, right? Like this, this terrifying moon with a face on it that's coming down, and late in the game you actually go to the moon. So I don't know exactly what to make of that, but it does seem like there is some kind of fascination with like um, these parallels between not just locations on the planet, but then the planet itself and this other, heavenly body. And maybe, yeah, there's something in world mythology, not just like the West, about like the way in which the moon is this kind of cause of um, magical or dreamlike or surreal states of mind. Yeah, and I don't know if we ever are going to get an explanation, but it sort of makes sense. Like it's a thing. Everyone knows that like monsters come from the moon. Yeah. Uh,
Yes, I'm just thinking about that. It certainly is a trope, and I recently actually on a plane ride home beat Sonic 3, and what happens at the end of Sonic 3 is you make it up to the heavens, and then the last boss is you have to have attained Supersonic, but then you fight in the heavens, and
mhm.
so there are just a couple interesting things about the moon. Is that it occupies an interesting place both mythologically, but also in philosophical systems up to the Middle Ages, in which the moon is usually seen as like the first heavenly body in a system of, let's say, around 10. It gets systematized to 10 in the Christian
Okay.
tradition at some point. Well, really, uh, they're like 7 planets, but then there are constellations, which are called fixed stars. There's the Prima Mobile, which is the ninth heaven, and then there's the particularly Christian and Pyrean, which is the 10th. But the moon is seen as the first.
Mm,
And for philosophers, it's the seat of what's called the active intelligence, which is this thing that shoots down unerring universal truths into the minds of the few thinkers.
sure.
And how that happens is the subject of is basically the debate
Mm,
of psychology in Middle Ages, and whether God makes that happen, and whether God just chooses to make that happen, or whether you have to have attained some level of insight before it can happen. And so there are lots of ins and outs to the debate. But
mm,
this is also a location that Dante goes to in the Paradiso. It's the first level of heaven and his scheme. And in it, he learns to think metaphysically rather than physically. Talks about why there are dark spots on the moon, and that's not because of density or rarity. It's because of level of level of electness of
mm,
certain spirits. Certain spirits are, well, he uses an analogy. He says some flames shine brighter than others, and they make the others seem darker by comparison, even though they are flames themselves.
sure.
And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, and this is more in line with what you were suggesting, perhaps even comes from this source, is Ariosto's idea of having a limbo of fools on the moon. So people are
Mm,
lunatics because they lose their minds to the moon. So the moon becomes this strange place that's not just like soon to be physical satellite of the Earth, but is sort of a psychological, cosmological space,
mhm, mhm.
a space that has the function of being where minds go. So it's sort of like a heaven,
Yeah.
in that it's above the Earth and it's always there, and it in some ways serves the Earth or is part of the Earth system, as it were. But it is negative in that it's where you become a fool or touched by the angels, as it were, by losing your mind to that place. But the mind remains somewhere. So you can go. So one can go on a quest to go get that mind, like in Ariosto. One has to do. And so I think there's an interesting conflation there. In the same way that Final Fantasy VIII has sort of a strange conflation, particularly in this moment when we're meeting Esthar and seeing Adel, between magic and technology. So do
Mhm.
we see in this element of space opera meets the Final Fantasy the conflation between heaven and the scientific notion of space, and see a lot of similarities but also differences. Like even just in the iconography of Adele's prison, it is made to look like an angel. There are
Yeah.
angel wings on it. But then also, if you want to think cosmologically and scientifically, like an Esthar person, that's an interesting image. But something similar about, say, the scientific notion of heaven and what's in the heavens, or where the heavenly bodies are in space, and sort of a Christian notion of heaven, or a philosophical Christian notion of heaven, like Dante would have had, is the notion of infinity. and
Mhm.
infinite magnitude. These are shared attributes of both heaven and sort of physical space as heaven, and also I think the fantasy and the space opera genre, that they hit the same level of scope, and they ask one to think on a level that is extra mundane. You know, most people I think have to think in terms of seconds and minutes and days and their own lives. The sort of scope that fantasy and I think space opera asks of one, and like theological or cosmological thinking asks of one, really take one out of the mundane or the
Mhm.
everyday. It is a scope of time that one doesn't, I think, just stumble onto, and a scope of space. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea that like the the mind is out there somewhere and we have to go recover it. Like, isn't that sort of what's going on with carrying Renoa up there too, right? Like,
Mm,
we're taking her to that liminal space, uh, in search of, her essence, her soul, or what her mind, which, is in some way, um, uh, in, you know, gone. It's been or repressed, and yeah, there's a really weird uh, kind of problem here of Squall. For so long he was bottling up all of these emotions, and now he's completely sort of letting them loose. I really like the idea that, like, um, in some sense he is uh, falling into the same kind of trap that we saw Cypher fall into. It makes him a more interesting character, actually. And this idea, like, that uh, you could perhaps like map on a magical or ensouled view of cosmos, and then a scientific or rational view of the same, you know, phenomena, right? And that at some point those two things are both viable and both in tension. And I think, like, historically, yeah, that happens at a certain point in the West, around the Enlightenment, maybe. Um, and and I guess it would happen in different ways in different places, right? Like, as
hmm hmm
autochthonous or like folk views or whatever it is of like what's going on in the cosmic sense, right? Is then gradually eaten up and eroded and gobbled up by a more rational scientific view, right? And I don't know, like, if um, those beliefs, those intuitions or whatever, can ever be fully wiped away, right? So yeah, we
Mm.
don't know enough about like Odine to know like what kind of scientist he really is, but he does seem to make room certainly for like the powers that the moon has, like, and uh, and yeah, he seems to potentially want to like restrain, the powers of the sorceress, but clearly they can't like totally annihilate that. Like, they have her controlled and contained, but she's still there. She's still very
Yeah.
dangerous. Like, they're very clear on that. So yeah, I mean, I think, to throw another one out there, right? You got Milton's Paradise Lost, where these two systems are also like, he's writing from a standpoint of like, I sort of know there's problems with the Ptolemaic system or whatever, um, but I'm gonna just like adapt it and go with it and sort of weave that in. And Tolkien is another really interesting case, where much more recent history, like, he rewrites and rewrites so many times, trying to figure out a way to square that circle of like, he wants to have his mythic cosmos happen a certain way, and yet there's all kinds of problems that he runs into as he's trying to make everything work with his created world and the sort of Empyrean or like recreation state, and like how these things interact and line up and such. And gosh, yeah, and I don't know, just like, even today people believe that their horoscope will tell them something about how their day's going to go. So clearly these beliefs are still considered viable in many places. uh,
You
yeah.
know, that's so funny. I was just reading books 5 and 6 of Augustine City of God, and he talks
Mm,
about that. He doesn't make fun of it, but he does really lambast the position of thinking that one's um, anything is affected by the position of planets, and uses, in fact, proto twin studies. He's like, well, if you think it's
Uh-huh.
one position or time is going to give you a boy or a girl, and honorable or dishonorable, what about with these twins? And one is a boy and one is a girl, and they're born at the same time, and all sorts of interesting things that he says there. But I feel compelled now at this late moment in the podcast to ask a personal question.
Okay.
And that is, did you, Wes, allow Zell to lead a team towards Lunatic Pandora? And were you successful? I'm going to answer first just to make sure we don't get off topic because of me. Prior to me answering this, I did have Zell
Uh-huh.
go, and then I missed it. And
What? You didn't get on?
oh rats. It's a very but yeah, no, I was parking at two different
Oh, the
points,
Passover. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and I had encounter none on, and then I decided to get some fights in, and then it was not where I
Oh.
expected it to be, and I could not find my way back to the arcade, and
Oh
the game did
no.
not end.
It let you miss it?
It le-
Interesting.
I that was what was amazing to me. I was like, oh man. So I do actually have a save where I would lose some stuff and some experience, but I have a save from before that, and I'm like,
Well, it's
yeah,
interesting. Like on the ship or whatever it is, like I said, I had encountered none on, so I don't know what battles you might have fought up there. The only thing that is notable is it's another place that we saw with Laguna, right? So that crystal place in the Central Ruins, that is what's on board Lunatic Pandora. And it's this green crystal background. The music has changed. Um, and all of those locations that you could sort of like fiddle with as Laguna, if you did so in just the right way, and it's easy if you follow a guide, all of those locations are now like really powerful draw points and items and like a combat, magazine for Zell for his like final limit break or whatever. So it's worth doing just to get to explore it. It's very cool, like visually, musically, and you get to a certain point where as you're like ascending to a certain level of it, a like a robotic looking, I don't know what to call it, like a dragonfly looking robot like pops down and it just sort of like levitates you up and like casts you off of the ship. So it doesn't even enter a battle sequence at all. It just like does to you basically what Adea did back in the fight with Renoa, and she just like controls your body, right? This thing, whatever it is, has that sort of power and doesn't even deign to fight us in a battle. It just boots you out. And yeah, that's the point at which, for my playthrough, it shifts to okay, so what's going on as we're coming out of cold sleep, right? And we're arriving in the space station. Um, so
that it's okay. So, well, I think because I have so far missed Lunatic Pandora, but I may go back and play it because I don't think I've done anything meaningful in the interim. But I have made it in the space station. I've talked to some people, seen the president attend to Adele, but I
mhm,
did find Elena, but I have not yet talked to her. I was thinking
right,
about talking to her perhaps after this conversation.
cool.
Um, but yes. Well, so yeah, so I think this is really interesting because it's yet another very strange inflection point where we go from being on the earth to being in the heavens, to having science and magic intersect, to having space opera and final fantasy
Hmm.
intersect, but of course with those interconnections to Final Fantasy VII and to Final Fantasy IV as well. Um, and so, right, like you said, sort of like the beginning of disc two, or when we were going through the Brothers Labyrinth and we hadn't done that much. This feels a little bit more like a Xenogears or a Xenosaga, in that there's a
Hmm.
lot of narrative happening, a little less ludology.
Hmm.
There's not as much playing, as it were, fighting. There's a little bit of exploring. There's a little bit of fighting, but there's a lot of having things like the Lunar Cry, Lunatic Pandora, Adele, history of what happened 17 years ago, sort of suggested to one. by people that one meets. And of course, and sort of starting to understand some implications, like that Esthar has been isolated for the last 17 years, and then they dress kind of funny. They're like Fisherman's Horizon, but Fisherman's Horizon is actually a little bit more with it than
Yeah.
they are. Though they are pacifists, where Esthar is not.
Yeah.
And so and then apparently Esthar is the sort of ancestral enemy of Galbadia, as we actually know. And now we see it from the other angle. The Galbadians coming towards Esthar instead of Laguna as a Galbadian going into the Lunatic Pandora and, fighting against those people from Esthar.
Yeah.
And now we've actually seen how that transition happened from Laguna, the Galbadian soldier, to Laguna, the somebody we don't know at Esthar.
Hmm. Yes, we shall find out. No, all the connections to Xenogears are quite conspicuous. And just looking at the release dates, I don't know about the, development process, but it's almost exactly a year. I want to say it's exactly a year after Xenogears is released that FF9 comes out. So yeah, I think there must have been some degree of cross-pollination there. Uh,
FF9 or FF8?
oh, sorry, 8. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 1998 and 1999.
Yeah, but a
Yeah.
year to the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh wow. To the day even. And so
Strange.
yeah. Well, yeah. There's perhaps a connection itself. Well, okay. So I think we touched on everything I really wanted to touch on today. Something I might mention about Dr. Odine that we did get. So just to your point, yeah, we don't know him that well, but the people around him say that he doesn't always care about the people he works on. So to watch
Mhm.
out. And so something about him, this connects to our earlier point, is that he's a little bit inhuman. So he's out of touch in the same way that everybody in Esthar is out of touch with the fashion. So he's not conspicuously different, although he does have the most clownish looking outfit. But a lot of the people look kind of like jesters,
Mhm.
and cartoonish colors, strange dimensions to their clothing, or strange levels of bagginess. Again, protrusions from the sides of their heads, highly stylized. They're out of touch, and he's out of touch emotionally,
Mhm.
speaking in a way different from Squall, but also serious. And so there's he, like maybe Shinra with their business interests, and certainly a Hojo, and his desire to learn the secrets of Mako and also Genova, and willingness to even try and mate Aerith and Nanaki,
Mm.
perhaps Red 13, whatever was supposed to happen between them in that strange experiment. Um, he seems like he's not quite there, but I don't know. He did create this ultimate weapon, we'll learn Lunatic Pandora it was made to be for Adel. And so
Oh.
at the very least, he's morally ambiguous. He at I guess at moral best serves whoever his president is in Esthar. And
Yeah.
when Adele was in command, he made her this weapon that we've now encountered that can bring about the thing that destroyed the first and the most gifted civilization,
Mm.
the Sentra people. And so he like what you said about him, where there are certain things that he can contain, but can't destroy. He is himself something that is like a perennial force in this world that
Mm.
continues to have an effect on it, but good under the current president of Esthar, and seemingly sort of bad and perhaps reverberatingly bad under the former leadership.
Yeah.
His powers, yeah, they they can there it's very interesting that it's a highly civilized, highly powerful, highly scientifically gifted people whose powers can be used for definite evil or good within the context of the world in which they live.
Yeah. So this is making me think about the way he speaks, right? I mean, we saw this with a few other characters. There's like a distinct difference, and
Yes.
his speech is coded as sort of German or Swiss, right? It's like this like mixing of V for W sounds,
Yeah, maybe
which is like
Russian, but
mad
yes, certainly.
scientist kind of
Yes.
thing going on. Um, yeah, yeah, and absolutely, there's echoes of the Kefka or the Hojo figure there. Um, the corresponding figure, kind of ambiguous in Xenogears, might be Krillian. Krillian is kind of a wild card. Um, and I mean, I think that's basically like the intellect, right? Like if the intellect is in some sort of relationship to the will, uh,
Mm.
it serves, right? The moral or personality behind it. And so when you translate that to the political sphere, yeah, he seems to just serve whoever's in power. Um, and doesn't seem to hold a grudge when his one-time test subject is now perfectly welcome on his spaceship, and his one-time labor is now free to run around. And I guess we're gonna find out Laguna's the president, I think. So yeah, the rags to riches, um, and he doesn't have any problem with that. So yeah. Also, speaking of wise people, you find the Ring of Solomon at the foot of the statues in Tyr's Point. It's an item that apparently is useless, but I know that according to study guides, strategy guides, you can combine it with certain other items and somehow get a GF out of it. I haven't been able to do that yet, but anyway, this idea of like a Solomon's ring, very direct reference to a whole kind of um, esoteric, tradition of magic and religion there. So it's kind of weird that that's placed at that particular spot where there's this connection between heavens and earth. Uh, yeah.
And also, that's very interesting because, of course, the GFs have a psychological connection to
Hmm.
one in the same way that there's a psychological connection to the moon, and that one can lose one's wits or gain intelligibles um, from them. But also, Dr. Odine doesn't seem to be have any problem with having vacuum sealed his old boss either. And so perhaps that's why he's willing to put up with the other things,
Yeah.
because he is now responsible for, in obliquely, not directly, for keeping Adele under wraps. And speaking of wraps, I think we have hit our time for
Okay.
this time, and we must click save on the save point, and click resume on our normal lives.
Sounds good.
And it's been fun playing with you, and now I've got to resume this other thing.
Okay. Thanks again. Appreciate it.